You're listening to Newshour from the BBC. I'm Razia Iqbal. Let's go back to our top story now, the continuing protests in Hong Kong calling for more democracy in the territory. How are these protests being reported on the mainland? When they began 10 weeks ago, the authorities censored much of the information, a policy that has become untenable as those protests continued. So there is coverage, but it's been censored or subjected to a degree of spin. Let's take a closer look at what is going on with Kerry Allen, who is the BBC's China media analyst. Kerry, let's just go back to how the coverage evolved to begin with and what happened once the protests continued week after week.
Well, when these protests started or became large scale in early June, it was a week after the 30th anniversary of the Tiananmen Square massacre. So there was heavy censorship already within the country, within mainland China. But then what happened was these protests, images of these protests, large groups of people, hundreds of thousands out on the street, they were being outright censored on platforms like Sina Weibo, which is the equivalent of Facebook or Twitter in China. So the government was censoring words related to the protests, Hong Kong, also the figures. So the original reported figure was about 1.3 million people out on the street. So the figure 1.3 million was outright censored. So lots of terms like this. The government didn't want to show any images of protests, and it hoped that they would just go away simply. But they just became bigger. The following week, there were 2 million people out on the streets, and they've continued in different areas around Hong Kong. And so what's happened is China's recognised that it can't simply suppress these like it has done with the Tiananmen Square massacre. What it's had to do instead is to create its own dialogue and to give that precedence. So what it's been doing is it's been handpicking footage or images of protesters violently clashing with the police, where it looks like the protesters are attacking. That's obviously only part of the story of what's been going on over this last 10 weeks. But it's those images and that video that has been exclusively seen in mainland China. So people are very, very angry and they're very uncomfortable, and they've got the sense that these protesters are hooligans.
So when you say people are angry about this, there is a sense that this disinformation is being called out, if you like.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we have to bear in mind that China is one of the most tightly controlled media environments in the world. Not only is there active censorship against things that the government doesn't want people to see, but also China employs what are known as the 50 cent party. These are people who are paid a small amount of money, 50 cents, by the government to post to create accounts on social media platforms, on internet websites, and to post messages in line with the government's message. So what happens is people, particularly on Hong Kong at the moment, because it is such a big story now in mainland China, they're just seeing floods of messages saying people support the Hong Kong police, because that's the official line that's coming out. And many of these accounts, they may not be by genuine people. They may be by one person creating accounts en masse and simply replicating messages. But for an average viewer of social media platforms, that's all they're seeing, that they're unable to see the stray comments that might be coming through with people saying some of these protests are peaceful.
And just very briefly, what about the official, not social media, just newspapers and television? Anything?
Well, what they've been doing is there have been some footage that we've seen internationally that we're just not seeing whatsoever. So I remember weeks ago, Nick Beake outside the Legislative Council.
BBC correspondent, yeah.
Yeah, where there was graffiti everywhere, all over the building, protesters storming. Nobody saw that because any messages of graffiti that would suggest that the government's in any way wrong, they wouldn't be shown. So there's been messages, very official messages from Carrie Lam. They've been handpicked. And yeah, these images of violent protesters. But everything else, very much suppressed.
Kerry Allen, the BBC's China media analyst, giving us an insight into how the protests in Hong Kong have been covered on mainland China. Thanks.